Hey everyone, this video begins at the location of the last clip I filmed for last week's video, Cottonwood Pass in Colorado. Now I know you may not think that this was the last location because of the way I edited that video, but it really was the very last filming site of that trip. This video is the first video I've made that really reflects what I want to do with this channel, which is to show you beautiful scenery and talk about the science that shaped it. So again, here we are at Cottonwood Pass. If you've been to Colorado at all, you might say that this is very typical Colorado Rocky Mountain geography, which is an absolutely true statement. But I look at it and I see something else. The effects of glaciers. Now, of course, when you look at this video, you don't see any glaciers. There's not much snow at all. But still, much of this landscape was shaped by glaciers. And we know that by looking at the shape of the valley, because a characteristic glacial valley has very steep, almost vertical sides and a pretty flat bottom. In valleys that were shaped by glaciers, what some people might call the head of the valley, the part where it backs up against the mountain peak, has a very characteristic bowl shape. The technical term for this is a cirque. Again, you see that the valley floor here is very flat. Let me show you another example from the footage I took from this trip. This is also a glacial cirque. So now I've taught you what to look for in terms of deciding whether something has been glaciated or not. The next thing I want to do is explain why glaciers make valleys in that shape. Let's start with a site that might be the most stereotypical example of normal, i.e. non-glacier erosion, the Grand Canyon in northern Arizona. If you look at these valleys, you see that they're kind of V-shaped, a clear sign to geologists that they've been eroded by water rather than ice. Why? Why does water erosion form V-shaped valleys and glacial erosion, ice erosion, if you want to think of it that way, why does that form these more U-shaped valleys? Let's think on a really tiny scale of what happens when water flows over a surface. So you get all these rushing water molecules that are moving along. They may be flowing smoothly, they may not be flowing smoothly, so there may be a lot of turbulence. They may be moving slow, or they may be moving fast. And so based on the shape of the channel and how fast the water's flowing or whatever, you may occasionally get something that's going to come in, whack something really hard in the right place, and just pop off a piece of the bottom or the side of the channel that the water's flowing through. So this is, again, happening at a really, really tiny level. If you look at most of what gets eroded by a river, it's usually really fine particles of clay or something like that. Obviously, if you get super, super fast moving water, like floodwaters, you can actually move large boulders and everything, but that's pretty rare. Usually it's just small amounts being worn down over time. So now let's zoom out and look at that macroscopically. Okay, this is really super simplified, but I want you to imagine this blue stuff at the bottom is the ocean, and this brown stuff is a cliff. And just for simplicity's sake, this is going to be a cliff made of exactly the same stuff all the way through. I'll talk about special cases later on. And I'm just going to put a lake up here. So here's some water, and I made the level of this lake pretty high, so it's going to go over the banks of the lake, and it's going to want to flow to the ocean. So let's say it flows through a river, and then it's going to just go off this cliff and waterfall down and splash into the ocean below. So what you'll find if you look at this case, which would never happen in real life, but this is theoretical, is that most of the erosion is going to happen where the water moves quickly, as I said before. And where is it moving the most quickly? Well, it's not moving quickly where the water is moving over pretty much flat terrain. It's actually going to be moving the most quickly as it falls to the ocean. Well, the way I've drawn this, some of the water that's falling to the ocean in the waterfall is not actually touching the cliff, so it can't erode it. So the place where most of the erosion is going to happen is right here, right where the water is starting to speed up and go over the edge of the cliff and is still in contact with the earth. So over time, if we peel back the water, you would see that the corner of that nice square cliff, or what used to be a nice square cliff, has gotten broken away. And so now the water is flowing like this. And now where is the erosion happening? Well, where the slope is right here, it's going to be moving faster than it is on the flat. So that is where the erosion is going to happen. And so, we can let that run for a while and peel back the water again, and we'll see that more has eroded away, right? And now it's going to look like this. And then over a long period of time, right, this part right here is always going to be where the erosion is happening. So you could see it might get down to this point, and then it might, over a very long period of time, right, the water may not even be in the lake anymore because it will have eroded into kind of a slopey shape. I showed a one-sided thing here, but if we are looking at a two-sided valley, what we're going to see is we're going to see the same sort of erosion happen on the other side. And so you'll get one of those V-shaped valleys as any steep cliffs get worn down at the corners and gradually work their way down into this V shape. So that's water erosion. And that explains these nice V-shaped valleys that we see in the Grand Canyon. All right, now let's talk about ice. So if you live anywhere where it snows, you may just get a bit of snow and it may melt away before the next snow comes, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe you get more snow on top of the first set of snow. And let's say you get even more snow on top of that first set of snow. Depending on where you live, you could get a very large buildup of snow. This is what happens where glaciers form. Glaciers form in very particular spots. Most people think of glaciers near the pole, like Antarctica or Greenland. And yeah, there's not as much sunlight there during the winter as there is in other parts of the world. It doesn't have to be that way. It can also be, let's say, in a valley that faces north so that it's shaded from the sunlight, right? The same thing could happen. You could just get this continual buildup of snow, and that snow might not melt even during the hottest part of the summer. So all of this snow is pressing down. And so I want you to stop and think about what happens if you take some freshly fallen snow and you step on it. Okay, this is my dog as a puppy. You could see that we had several inches of snow, maybe 6 inches, 15 centimeters. And as soon as he steps on it, it basically squishes all the way almost down to the ground, right? It's less than an inch of snow once it gets compressed. In the case of a glacier, it's not a person stepping on it that's compressing it. It's just the weight of the snow above it. So if your snowflakes fall, freshly fallen snow, a lot of it is like 80 or 90% air. And that's why it's easy for it to squish down when we step on it. But over time, as more and more pressure gets put on it, right, you can get the same amount of snowflakes, but more and more of the air is compressed out of it, so it starts to shrink down. And so that's one of the ways that glaciers compress with new annual snowfall. The other thing is, we've been talking about compression as though we were talking about like a down sleeping bag. Those feathers, you can fluff them up so there's lots of air in between, or you can squish them down so they're resting right next to each other. But we're not talking about feathers, we're talking about snowflakes, which are basically ice crystals. Well, ice crystals can partially melt and recrystallize into larger ice crystals. So you could take the same amount of ice that we have here, and if you take, say, every 4 snowflakes and turn them into one big ice crystal, you could end up with something that's even more compact. And you can keep squishing that down as it partially melts and recrystallizes. And then you get to the point where you have the sort of ice that you have in a glacier, where it's not just like actual air in between crystals. It's really more like you have a whole huge ice crystal thing with air bubbles in it. Okay, but what does that mean for erosion? Let's go back to this sheet of ice on top of the ground. So what's happening here, I mean, the ice is flowing, and that's actually not something I'm going to talk about in this video. We're going to talk about that in a few weeks. There's this downward pressure of tons and tons of built up ice that's pushing down. And just to give you an idea of how much pressure there might be, if you have a 20-meter thick glacier, which is not a very thick glacier at all, the pressure at the bottom would be about 1.7 atmospheres. And that's like diving down 55 feet underwater. So I've never gone that far underwater, despite all of my time at sea. I like to stay on top of the water. I don't think I've ever gone more than 10 or 15 feet underwater. And even there, I could feel the squeezing, right? So you can just imagine 55 feet underwater. That's pretty deep. But I think it's still doable by scuba. If you had a 100-meter thick glacier, which is, that's kind of a small to moderate glacier. The pressure at the bottom is about 8.7 atmospheres, which is the same as being 285 feet underwater. And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure you can't even scuba that far. And then if you get one of the huge glaciers like they have up in Alaska, you might have a 1,000-meter thick glacier where the pressure at the bottom is 87 atmospheres, 87 times what you feel just standing on the surface of the Earth. And that's like being basically half a mile underwater. So there's a lot of pressure. And it's this pressure pushing down as the glacier moves, very, very slowly, by the way. It is going to scrape whatever's at the bottom. It's just friction. Very slow friction, like gradually scraping a sheet of sandpaper over something. So what I'm showing you here is, I guess, a cartoony diagram of what you might call an ice sheet or a continental glacier like we had during the ice ages. But most glaciers don't form in big sheets. Well, unless you're in Antarctica or Greenland. Most of what we see is we see glaciers forming in river valleys. So a lot of times there was an old river valley that had been eroded by, by normal rain, runoff, water erosional processes. And then because of changing climate, it would fill with a glacier. And so now we have this downward pressure, and this downward pressure is what's providing the erosional force. So where's going to wear off? Well, it turns out it's really important what the glacier is trying to scrape away. So if you have any soft material, that's going to get taken out. It's basically eroding straight down from where it is. And it will keep eroding straight down until we get to harder rock, what we call bedrock. But the soft stuff is going to get scraped away pretty easily. And it will gradually start forming this bowl shape like we were seeing in the photos. I apologize that there haven't been a lot of landscape shots in this video. This is planned to be a multiple part series on glaciers, and I am about to see a whole bunch of glaciers. So I had to make kind of this introductory video based on landscape shots of glaciated terrain without glaciers actually in it. By the time this video posts, I will be on my long-awaited 50-and-a-half birthday trip. Subscribe if you want to see glaciers up close and personal, because that's coming soon.